Hello and a very warm welcome to a brand new edition of World Panorama with me, Frank Pereira, on Rajya Sabha television. Over the next half an hour, we'll bring you a roundup of all the significant events to have happened around the world this week. But first, a look at the headlines. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton tighten grips on their respective party nominations for the U.S. presidential race. Still a three-horse race in the Republican camp with Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio looking to hold Trump back. French authorities begin demolition of Calais migrant camp. The jungle, an effort to stamp down fugitive migrant pushes into Britain as the crisis raises a humanitarian crisis in Europe. The UN Security Council clears tighter than ever sanctions against North Korea, aiming to cut off funds for its nuclear and banned weapons program. But dictator Kim is defiant, tells his army to keep nuclear warheads on standby. And one of New Zealand's greatest cricket icons, Martin Crowe, passes away aged 53. Crowe is widely considered his country's greatest ever batsman. Well, our top story on World Panorama this week. Democrat Hillary Clinton and Republican Donald Trump further secured their claim over nominations for their respective parties this week, each winning 7 states out of 11 that held primaries on the so-called Super Tuesday. But the races are far from wrapped up just yet, particularly on the Republican side. Here's a report.
The now undisputed front-runners for the two parties, at least just yet. Super Tuesday, with 11 states going to primaries on a single day, is often considered the biggest indication of the final picture that may emerge. Republican Donald Trump, one considered outrightly unacceptable, has made a race of it, now having won 14 of 15 states where primaries have been held. He's left competitors Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz far behind and is already firing against the Democrats.
I'm a unifier. I know people are going to find that a little bit hard to believe, but believe me, I am a unifier. Once we get all of this finished, I'm going to go after one person. That's Hillary Clinton, on the assumption she's allowed to run, which is a big assumption.
In the Democratic camp, Hillary Clinton is way ahead of the only other competitor, Bernie Sanders, also winning 7 states on Super Tuesday and over 600 delegates ahead overall. It seems a more unbeatable lead here. And Hillary, too, is ready to hit back at Trump.
It's clear tonight that the stakes in this election have never been higher. And the rhetoric we're hearing on the other side has never been lower. Trying to divide America between us and them is wrong, and we're not going to let it work.
So post-Super Tuesday, it's 15 states down, but 35, including some big ones, yet to go. Here's how it stands in the fight for delegates. Hillary Clinton has 1,052 delegates, 1,331 short of a victory she can rightfully claim. Bernie Sanders has 427 delegates, nearly 2,000 short of the key 2,383 mark. For the Republicans, Donald Trump has the lead with 319 delegates, just over 900 short of the 1,237 he needs to win. Ted Cruz has 226, 1,011 short. And Marco Rubio, who also clings to the fight, has 110. For Cruz and Rubio, their best hope is not to overcome Trump on the numbers game, but to prevent him from getting a majority so that they can fight it out on the floor of the Republican convention in July.
Conventional wisdom would tell you it's time to get behind one person. But because things are fractured right now, I think you're going to see Ted Cruz stay in this. You're going to see Marco Rubio stay in this. You're going to see John Kasich stay in it. Look, they all think they've got a path to somehow winning this thing. The problem is for all of them, that path includes everybody else dropping out. And so until the others decide to do that, I think it's Donald Trump's race to lose.
Even if the Democratic race is now just an academic exercise, the Republican one is likely to stay volatile for at least another month. Campaign bandwagons on both sides have moved to Florida and Ohio, two of the big ones among other states that go to primaries on the 15th of March. For the candidates, it's a tough balance, holding on to their support base, not losing that of the rival partyman, while wooing over opposition supporters. And the stakes are as big as it can get. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha Television.
Well, joining me for a chat this week to talk about this is the consulting editor of the Hindustan Times, Pramit Chaudhuri. Pramit, thank you so much for joining me on the program. You know, as far as Donald Trump is concerned, a few months ago, I think we spoke about it. Many others, too, had written Donald Trump off. Are you surprised, at how far he has come?
Yes, definitely. I think the assumption had been that Trump, while he had an appeal, his appeal was limited, and therefore he would struggle to get past the first few primaries. I would argue his appeal is still limited. On average, he's getting about 35% of the vote in each of the Republican primaries. There's deep antipathy within the Republican Party to him. 49% of Republican voters, when asked, said they will never vote for Donald Trump. But he is winning, as has been mentioned, because the other segment of the vote, the other 65% of the vote of the party that does not like Donald Trump, is highly fractured. The Republican Party, in effect, right now has three voting blocks. One is the evangelical vote, which was divided between Ben Carson and Ted Cruz.
Yes.
Carson has just dropped out now, but allowing Cruz to take over that block, but that block by itself is not too strong. The establishment block, which is almost half the party, was at one point divided by four candidates, now is divided only by Kasich and Rubio. But one of them has to drop out for that establishment vote to come together again. So Trump, meanwhile, holds the middle ground, and he holds what I would call a rebellious or insurgent white working class vote that is very angry with the establishment of its own party. And to some degree, that same class was feeding the Bernie Sanders vote on the Democratic side, on a sort of left of center platform. And as long as has been mentioned, as long as the other candidates don't drop out and the anti-Trump vote consolidate behind one candidate, Trump may win simply because he has a plurality of support versus actually having the majority of his party on his side.
So Trump, if things stand as they are right now, and if they go in this particular direction, could be the potential nominee from the Republican Party. But how is he going to match up against, say, a Hillary Clinton?
Well, we do actually have polling evidence on that. There have been polls taken in which people have been asked if it's Clinton versus Trump, who would you vote for? Hillary tends to win almost all of these, but by a very thin margin, only 3%, 2 to 3%, which is not substantial. And this indicates, as I've mentioned, that because of the battle even in the Democratic Party side, where she had to fend off a remarkably strong case program by Bernie Sanders, another person who nobody expected to go anywhere when he began. And, Sanders' support base among, again, the youth and, again, the working class remains extraordinarily strong. Last month, despite the fact that he looked like he was finished, he raised $42 million in donations that were $30 in average. He refuses to take money from corporate lobbies, right? So he's actually taking from very small donations, from
$5, $10,
$3, $1, even pennies are being sent to him. And this means Hillary's problem is that, as I said, this same working class anger that was feeding Trump overlaps into Sanders. And a lot of Sanders supporters are looking at Trump and saying he's not actually too bad. He's closer to me than Hillary is. And this is going to be Hillary's problem when she goes in, that she's going to fight a candidate who may actually be able to merge a large chunk of what are called the Reagan Democrats, conservative blue-collar workers, who vote, who are, should we say, economically Democratic, but culturally Republican, but do not see her as their representative.
Indeed. There's a lot of money that is required to, run these campaigns in the U.S., so that's going to be a big problem for Bernie Sanders, isn't it? Because his donations, like you mentioned, and like everyone has been telling us too, is like $1, a few pennies, $5 and $10. So where is it that he's going to get this money from, and can he run till the end?
Well, so far the money keeps coming in. As I said, just 1 month alone he raised $42 million. And in fact, if you subtract Hillary's what is called Political Action Committee donations, which are largely corporate in nature, he raised far more money than Hillary does.
Yes.
Hillary is not getting that kind of support on the ground that he is. But he runs a very cheap candidacy because he uses youth to fuel to power his candidacy. He doesn't hire people. He just gets college students to do all the hard work for him on the ground. So he doesn't need much money. Curiously, Donald Trump is not spending much money either.
Indeed.
He's running his candidacy almost purely by word of mouth.
You know, talking about Donald Trump, he's not very popular within his party.
Yes.
So what is the best case scenario really for the Republicans and also someone like a Marco Rubio? Very quickly.
They have to get the other candidates off the board. They have to get Cruz has to realize that his evangelical support base is now dead, because once they move out of the South, the American South, the evangelical vote dies. You can see the establishment is trying very hard to knock Cruz out and pour their money, which was going to Jeb Bush, to pour their money behind Rubio. Even then, it's going to be very difficult for Rubio to get that vote. Because it's too late in the game, but that's really their only hope right now.
All right, Pramit, we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you so much for joining us on the program and putting things into perspective. For us, we'll hopefully have you again on the program later on and then, talk about this.
It's a long election.
Yes, it's a long election and an interesting election too. Thank you so much. All right, on that note, we'll slip into a short break now, but still to come. China is set to announce a less than usual rise in its military expenditure for 2016-17, but the figure is still 4 times India's budget for the same time. We'll have that and much more on the other side. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Rajya Sabha Television. Well, screws tighten on isolated North Korea as the UN Security Council voted this week to impose a broad array of tight sanctions against the nation because of its recent nuclear test and missile launch. The resolution aims to cripple parts of the North Korean economy that fuel its nuclear and ballistic missile programs. While world powers and North Korea's neighbors welcomed the move, Kim Jong-un's regime remains brazenly defiant. Here's a detailed report.
This UN crackdown goes further than any from the body in the last 2 years. Tighter than ever sanctions against North Korea, drafted by the US and Pyongyang's ally China, aim to cut off funds for North Korea's nuclear and other banned weapons program. They're even harsher than the Iran sanctions regime that ended with a historic nuclear deal last year.
As the resolution that we have adopted today underscores, virtually all of the DPRK's resources are channeled into its reckless and relentless pursuit of weapons of mass destruction. The North Korean government would rather grow its nuclear weapons program than grow its own children.
On the sanctions list, measures set to isolate the already isolated and poverty-stricken nation further. A ban on North Korea exporting its natural resources, including major earner coal. Complete prohibition on aviation and rocket fuel supply and sale of small arms to North Korea, all as opposed to conspicuously illegal North Korean planes and ships carrying cargo are to be closely inspected. UN member states are to expel North Korean diplomats and foreign nationals engaged in illicit activities. Member states are not to allow North Korea to charter their vessels or aircraft. The EU and world powers welcomed the UNSC's resolution, even as China stressed the need to avoid moves that will aggravate tensions on the Korean peninsula, obviously alluding to talks on deploying the THAAD missile that encroaches on its security interests.
The sanction is not the final purpose of the resolution. Though not being able to fundamentally settle the nuclear issue on Korean peninsula, the resolution adopted today should serve as a new starting point and a stepping stone in the political solution for the issue.
North Korea reacted defiantly, the South claiming it fired a string of short-range projectiles towards the East Sea hours after the sanctions announcement. It's not clear if they were missiles or artillery fire. North Korea accuses the UN Rights Council of politicization and double standards, saying it will never be bound by any resolutions concerning its human rights record.
We shall no longer participate in international sessions singling out the human rights situation of the DPRK. for mere political attack. Any resolutions to be adopted against DPRK in such sessions will remain nothing but only a proof of partiality and double standards. Whether or not such resolutions are to be put to a vote will be none of our business, and we will never ever be bound by them.
Discussions on sanctions had taken off after the North's hydrogen bomb test in January. The country described itself as a nuclear weapon state both in name and reality. Experts fear it could have at least 20 to 100 weapons capable of hitting its neighbors or even the US by 2020. The big question is, will the sanctions deter the nuclear program or in fact hit North Korea's people even more than they are already? Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha Television.
Moving on now, France this week began a crackdown on sections of a growing migrant population living illegally in the country, demolishing a camp in Calais town, evicting hundreds of refugees looking to sneak across the English Channel into Britain. The operation is the most dramatic step France has taken to end Calais' migrant problem, which has festered for years, a root cause for its tensions with Britain.
Bulldozers, tear gas, tarpaulin roofs and plywood walls pulled down. French authorities moved in Tuesday morning to dismantle this giant refugee camp called the Jungle. The sprawling, squalid site in Calais has housed thousands of migrants for the last decade and more, people hoping to make their way to a better life across the English Channel in Britain. With the crackdown came reactionary protests. For many, the raids stand for a strong message sent out, even alongside the determination to fight on.
They're going to finish with the jungle, everything we don't know what we have to do. Food problem, clothes problem, everything is problem. Many families here. No one help us. We are here, we can't do nothing.
Efforts to evacuate the nearly 1,000 migrants in the southern part of the camp had begun a week before the crackdown. France claims it has earmarked a better place for them. But the migrants have grown increasingly desperate since the British Border Force had stepped in to reinforce border controls on their movement. Britain has provided security fencing to prevent migrants from storming the ferry port, the entrance to the Channel Tunnel or the Eurostar rail tracks. Raiding the camp, evicting the residents came just before President François Hollande and Prime Minister Cameron met on the long-pending refugee crisis and efforts to stop their crossing into the United Kingdom.
Nous considérons ensemble que la jungle de...
Together we think that the jungle in Calais cannot be a humanitarian option for those wishing to offer protection to those men, women and children who have fled persecution and who seek a future for themselves.
fuient les persécutions et qui cherchent un avenir pour eux-mêmes.
But activists insist a forceful eviction does little more than shifting the problem. A desperation to move into Britain on trains and lorries across the English Channel persists as strong as before. NGO Amnesty International had raised concern on the human rights situation around migrants pouring into Europe. And this incident raises further concern.
This is not any way to resolve the refugee problem. We are not resolving anything by destruction of this camp because the refugees are still here. The fact is, this is only making it more precarious. A few will go and live in containers and others in the welcome centers for migrants across France. Yesterday, 15 got on one bus, 18 boarded another. It's not an appropriate solution and the state does not have adequate space for everybody.
Demolition activity at the jungle that is slated to continue for a month or so, and the massive protests by migrants that have arisen in the area and outside threatens to snowball into a larger human rights debate. This particular demonstration saw victims sew their lips together in protest. The dust kicked up in clearing the jungle is unlikely to settle anytime soon.
Meanwhile, the United Nations has warned that Europe is on the cusp of a self-induced humanitarian crisis due to the rapid build-up of migrants on Greece's borders. Nearly 10,000 migrants, many fleeing war in the Middle East, Asia and Africa, have been stranded in Idomeni in Greece as Macedonia has shut its borders and decided to allow passage to only a handful of asylum seekers with identification papers from Syria and Iraq. Massive protests have broken out, with Macedonian police firing tear gas shells. Reports put the total number of migrants in Greece at over 25,000, living in squalid conditions. A UNHCR statement said inconsistent policies in the continent, which faces its worst immigration crisis since the end of World War II, are causing unnecessary suffering and risk being at variance with EU and international law standards. The EU proposed 700 million euros in emergency aid for Greece and other states to help them manage the influx at their borders.
It's time to wake up. Either we have massive relocation from Greece, and that's what we call for, massive, like we did from the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia during the war in Kosovo in 1999. Either we have massive orderly relocation, either we will have a repeat of what we've seen last year, with fragmentation of the routes in the Western Balkan, possibly going to Bulgaria, directly from Greece to Italy, or going to Albania. We would like to see that orderly, and that's why we think we should not shoot down the relocation scheme just because the results are not yet there. Countries have to wake up.
In other news now, former New Zealand captain Martin Crowe passed away this week after a long battle with cancer. He was 53. Auckland-born Crowe is widely regarded as one of New Zealand's finest batsmen, scoring 17 centuries and 5,444 runs in 77 tests at an average of 45.36. He captained the Kiwis in 16 tests. He crafted more runs than anybody else in the 1992 World Cup, which was co-hosted by Australia and New Zealand. He was named player of the tournament there. Crowe retired in 1996 with a knee injury and went on to become a television commentator and author. He also helped develop Cricket Max, a precursor to T20. Crowe's funeral will be held in Auckland on March 11th. Well, here are some other big stories that made headlines across the world this week in our next segment, Globe Watch.
China's defense budget will rise by 7 to 8% in 2016, the lowest hike in 6 years, but expected to be enough to push the military outlay over the $150 billion mark for the first time. Though the increase for the year 2016-17 is being perceived as modest, it is still 4 times more than India's defense budget for the same period. A Chinese government spokesperson said the lowest hike in the defense budget since 2010 is in line with the slowdown of the country's economy. The execution of Mumtaz Qadri in Pakistan for the killing of then Punjab Governor Salman Taseer in 2011 triggered massive protests across the country through last week. Tens of thousands of Islamists and supporters raised anti-government slogans in Karachi, Rawalpindi and other cities. Qadri was hanged for killing secular Governor Salman Taseer, who had campaigned to change Pakistan's harsh blasphemy laws. Though liberals had condemned the assassination, many, including some in the religious establishment and legal circles, had praised Qadri. South African athlete Oscar Pistorius has been denied leave to appeal against his conviction for murdering his girlfriend Reeva Steenkamp. The National Prosecuting Authority said the Constitutional Court found no prospect of success in Pistorius' appeal. This means that Pistorius will now be sentenced for murder in April with a minimum of 15 years in jail. The Supreme Court of Appeal had changed 29-year-old Pistorius' conviction to murder in December, though he had earlier been convicted of culpable homicide. A NASA astronaut and 2 Russian cosmonauts landed in Kazakhstan on Wednesday. They had been aboard the International Space Station for 340 days, the longest US space mission yet. The trio have been the subjects for dozens of medical experiments and science studies designed to learn more about how weightlessness and high radiation environment of space impact the human body.
And finally, it's Fashion Week season at couture centres across Europe, and the latest one is on at Paris, the fashion capital of the world. I leave you today with a winter garden of silk and velvet that bloomed at one of the hundreds of shows that are on there. See you again next time.